a Taung warrior who conquered a planet that would be named after himself. Mandalore the First led his crippled race from a catastrophic war on the planet Coruscant against their enemies, the Zell. The Taung would settle on the planet initially called Rune, and under the rule of Mandalore, they would tame the savage landscape of their new homeworld. In doing so, they made sport out of slaughtering the gargantuan mythosaurs that were the original inhabitants of the planet. When the Taung settled, Mandalore the First, or otherwise known as Mandalore the Great in canon, formed the Mandalorian Crusaders. Mandalore was the earliest known individual to wear a ceremonial mask, which was initially carved from the sternum bone of a mythosaur taken from the monster's heart. It was modeled after the facial features of the Taung species and became one of the most recognizable designs in the entirety of Star Wars. Mandalore became the first person to use the title Mandalore, and as his fame and achievements grew across the planet, his mask became the symbol of power and leadership for all Mandalorians, used by many future leaders as well. When Mandalore the Conqueror took the place of his predecessor, the Mandalorians were still trying to make a name for themselves. They had barely gained a foothold in the galaxy, and their formal organization as Mandalorian Crusaders was still a new concept. Without a solid timeline, Mandalore the Conqueror took up the role of Mandalore between 7000 and 3996 BBY. It was this Mandalore that oversaw the first expansion of the Mandalorian culture, supervising a number of military campaigns that greatly expanded the territory of the Mandalorians. This gave the culture near exponential growth of resources to help fund their crusades and expansion while reinforcing their own ranks. While it was Mandalore the First that established the Mandalorian Crusaders, it was Mandalore the Conqueror who was actually the first leader of these combatants. Out there among the stars, every world has its own story, and every hero carries a symbol of who they are. For us, that symbol might just be a ring from Gentle Bands. Gentle Bands creates handcrafted rings that look like they were forged in a galaxy far, far away. Their space and meteorite collections are something special. Pieces built with real meteorite fragments, polished titanium, and deep black tungsten that feels like it came straight from the armor of a Mandalorian or the cockpit of an X-Wing. Each design draws from the cosmos itself. Swirling textures that look like distant nebulae, subtle metal tones that catch the light like a twin sunset on Tatooine, and just like the Star Wars galaxy, every ring tells a story. Some are sleek and elegant, like the calm of a Jedi Master. Others are bold and rugged, perfect for a rebel. These aren't just accessories, they're emblems of identity, a way to carry the wonder of the galaxy with you wherever you go. And if you've ever wanted a piece of that universe for yourself, now's the time. Gentle Bands is giving Red 5 viewers 25% off with the code RED5 at checkout. So check out Gentle Bands through the link below, explore their space and meteorite collections, and find the ring that feels like it was made for you. Because the Force may bind the galaxy together, but your story deserves something to mark its place in it. But of all the Taung that took up the mantle of Mandalore, Mandalore the Indomitable is of the ones we know the most about. Serving as the warlord of the Mandalorian clans during the Great Sith War, Mandalore the Indomitable led his crusaders in an invasion of Tetan space, followed by a confrontation with the renowned Sith Lord Ulic Qel-Droma. This conflict saw the Indomitable swear a personal oath of allegiance to Qel-Droma, pledging his Mandalorian army to the Sith. Alongside the Sith, Mandalore the Indomitable planned an invasion of Coruscant with Qel-Droma, but the latter was captured by the Jedi. This led the Mandalore to seek out the Sith Lord Exar Kun on Yavin 4, enlisting the Sith Lord and laying siege to the capital of the Republic. Later, Mandalore the Indomitable would attack the planet of Onderon along with its surrounding moons. Unfortunately, his invading forces would be thwarted by the defending Beast Riders. The Mandalore would find himself on the jungle moon of Duxin. Here, he became surrounded by several dangerous predators on the moon and cut off from the rest of his forces. Unfortunately, here he would lose his life, but his mask would be found by the next entry on this list, who would proclaim himself the new Mandalore. Mandalore the Ultimate is possibly the most well-known and publicly renowned individual who ever bore the title of Mandalore, one of the last of the Taung species to hold the title and known to some as the Great Shadow Father. He sought to bring his people out from the depths of betrayal of the Great Sith War. Mandalore the Ultimate took it as his mission to prevent the Mandalorian ways from vanishing forever, as the Taung species neared extinction. He went to regroup the Mandalorians into the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders and slowly began to conquer worlds on the fringe of the galaxy who had been left defenseless during the Great Sith War. Mandalore took advantage of the empathetic Republic and personally led his forces as they invaded Republic territory. The Neo-Crusaders had been so effective that they nearly defeated the Republic during what were called the Mandalorian Wars. It was only through the courageous leadership of Jedi Knights Revan and Malak that Mandalore the Ultimate would be defeated. The tide of the war would be turned against Mandalore, and in a glorious battle and a last-ditch effort to defend the Mandalorians, he challenged Revan to single combat. Revan would be the better combatant, and Mandalore the Ultimate would lose his life to the great Jedi Knight. After the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War began when Revan and Malak turned away from the Jedi Council and formed their own Sith Empire. An unknown individual of the Taung species took up the mantle of Mandalore. Most notably, he is responsible for the testing of stealth field generators in the Kashyyyk Shadowlands, something encountered by a reborn Revan in his search for the Starforge. At some point, this unnamed Mandalore encountered Canderous Ordo, who had recovered the Mandalore's mask and sought to unify the various Mandalorian clans. The Taung was already dying and did not survive meeting the Mandalorian mercenary. He asked Canderous to adopt his clan and take his armor to preserve their heritage. Of course, Canderous would oblige, integrating this Mandalore's mask into his own helmet, and subsequently became the next entry on this list. The timeline on this one is a little muddy. We know that Mandalore the Preserver is next in line, and he attained the role at least in 3951 BBY, but the year of his death is listed at 3642 BBY. Regardless, Mandalore the Preserver was the once mercenary Canderous Ordo. For a time, Ordo had been a companion of the reborn Revan after encountering him on the planet of Taris. During his travels with Revan, the Jedi would task Canderous to reunite the Mandalorian clans, which he took to doing as soon as Revan disappeared to the call of an uprising Sith Empire. Eventually, Ordo would encounter an ailing Taung who proclaimed himself the rightful Mandalore, the story of which we just went over. After taking the Mandalore's armor and absorbing his clan into Clan Ordo, Canderous took up the name Mandalore the Preserver and held the title of Mandalore while organizing his operation on the moon of Duxin. This is where he would meet the Jedi exile Mitra Surik and aid in settling the Onderon Civil War. He would confide in the young female Jedi that his age was getting the best of him and that his armor and implants were the only things keeping him going in his older years. It's unsure whether he was killed by the next entry or if he died due to natural causes, but he nonetheless left a rift in Mandalorian society. Mandalore the Infernal was a leader we know almost nothing about. We know that they were a Mandalore prior to the Great Galactic War, and that they requested missile designs involving thermonuclear fusion to be crafted. Other than that, we know nothing. Not even the species of the individual who took the name Mandalore the Infernal. Unfortunately, this fully comprehensive list contains 3 entries with an unknown timeline, so we're just putting them here as this is where we think they best belong. If you know otherwise, let us know in the comments. Rana Nasat was a female Mandalorian who, at some point in her life, held the title of Mandalore and became the traditional leader of the Mandalorians. For someone who held the name of Mandalore the Destroyer, there's not much that backs up that title. During her time, she presided over the siege of the city Luon. While engaging in the sieges, this Mandalore decided to flex the strength of her Mandalorians to the city's authority figure while offering them a final chance to surrender. The individual known as Mandalore the Binder was a male Mandalorian warrior who was born the son of a rug weaver of all things. Born on the planet Harswi, known for its luxurious loom-woven carpets, he eventually rose to claim the title of Mandalore. Despite not having anything notable written about him, Mandalore the Binder is remembered as one of the greatest leaders of the Mandalorian people. The Mandalorian warrior known as Mandalore the Hammerborn claimed the title at an unknown time. Growing up in the alleys of Kol Atorn, this Mandalore learned to speak the native Mandalorian language from exiles and immigrants who settled there, eventually developing a local accent. Much like Mandalore the Binder, despite not having much known about them, Mandalore the Hammerborn is remembered as one of the greatest leaders of the culture. A human male Mandalorian warrior who fought in both the Great Galactic War and the Cold War, the man who would become Mandalore the Lesser lived on the planet of Geonosis as a gladiator fighting for prestige. He gained his fame through a branch of the Sith Empire known as Imperial Intelligence. They identified this young human as a pawn which they would use to reunite the Mandalorian clans and direct an alliance with the Sith. They worked to rig his gladiatorial matches and spread the rumor of him being the new warrior king of his people. As an act of loyalty, the new Mandalore directed his followers to blockade the Hydean Way, a vastly important hyperspace route for Republic trade. This crippled the Galactic Republic, making the Sith the apparent victors of the Great Galactic War. The blockade itself lasted for a year before it was broken, so to re-energize his people, Mandalore the Lesser would organize something called the Great Hunt. The victor of this competition challenged the rule of Mandalore the Lesser to a duel of single combat. This saw the fall of the old Mandalore, and the winner of the duel would then become the newest leader of the Mandalorians. Known as Artus Locke, the human male who took the name of Mandalore the Vindicated also lived during the time of the Great Galactic War. Having lived through the reign of Mandalore the Lesser, Artus would seek to regain Mandalorian support after being defeated during the blockade of the Hydean Way. He took his chance by competing in the Great Hunt, becoming the grand champion of the competition, and challenged the Mandalore to a duel in the gladiatorial arenas on Geonosis, the same ones where the former Mandalore had been a champion gladiator. Artus would successfully defeat the Mandalore, taking his role and becoming known as Mandalore the Vindicated. He consolidated his powers over the other Mandalorian clans, but ensured that his Mandalorians remained allies of the Sith Empire. Mandalore the Vindicated would be killed by agents of the Eternal Empire of Zakul when his entire clan was surrounded by Sky Troopers. Otherwise known as vizsla, Mandalore the Avenger wouldn't be the only one of her clan to earn the title of Mandalore. She gained her notoriety during the Great Galactic War between the Galactic Republic and the resurgent Sith Empire, and even played a part in rebelling against the Zakul Eternal Empire. She, like many Mandalorians, was a bounty hunter who often found herself under the employ of the Sith. She made use of her incredible martial skills when undertaking risk-intensive missions and was credited with assassinating Republic senators, assaulting the planet of Alderaan with the Sith Lord Malgus, and more. Vizsla was even contracted to disable the defense grid on the planet Coruscant, which allowed for Darth Malgus to infiltrate the Jedi Temple and cripple the heart of the Galactic Republic. When the Eternal Empire of Zakuul invaded the galaxy and Mandalore the Vindicated was slain in combat, Shae Vizsla was chosen as the next Mandalore and took up the name of Mandalore the Avenger. The mercenary named Ega Awad, or Mandalore the Uniter, was the cultural leader of the Mandalorians during the final century of the New Sith Wars. Returning to the planet Mandalore, he discovered that a galaxy-wide plague had killed his family and most of his clan. He also found that raiders and pirates endangered friendly starship travel throughout Mandalorian space. 7 years later, Awad would become the leader of Mandalore and began to recall Mandalorians to defend their home world and its surrounding space. This would grant him the title of Mandalore the Uniter. He would also create reforms in the military structure of the Mandalorians and manufacture the culture's traditional armor using the famous alloy known as Beskar. Under his rule and that of successor Mandalorians, Mandalorian space became a powerful and influential region of the galaxy and even offered protection to neighboring sectors. This next Mandalore remains unnamed, but is known to have been the leader of the Acolyte faction of the Mandalorians. They were the ruler of the Mandalorians after the War of 200 BBY that saw the Mandalorians exterminate a species known as the Ithulans. This saw the intervention of the Jedi, despite the lack of action by the High Council in response to the genocide. A group of rogue Jedi in alliance with the Bounty Hunters Guild had the goal to stop the extermination, leading to the death of this Mandalore. After the death of the previously unknown Mandalore, another unnamed Mandalorian took up the title. Unfortunately for them, a bounty was placed on their head, which was taken up by the fearsome Jedi bounty hunter named Dirge. This bounty hunter harbored a long-standing hatred for the Mandalorians and successfully completed the bounty. This didn't come without its consequences for Dirge, however, as the Mandalore's followers subdued the bounty hunter and tortured him to the point of mental instability, forcing him to spend a century in hibernation. It was at this point that we know of that, for the first time, those who took up the role of Mandalore did not also align with any particular title. Rather, they continued to bear the name of their family or clan as a symbol of pride. Jaster Mereel was a male human born on the world of Conquered Dawn, which had strong Mandalorian ties. For a time, Mereel served as a journeyman protector, one of the planet's lawkeepers, until the day came where he would kill a corrupt superior officer. Mereel would be exiled for his action, going on to join the Mandalorians. Being such an accomplished soldier, Mereel's battle prowess earned him the respect of his super commando peers, eventually becoming Mandalore. In his tenure with this title, he would institute a Mandalorian behavior codex, which held the Mandalorians to a higher standard, and that they should conduct themselves as honorable mercenaries. This saw the Journeyman Protectors face opposition, and two factions would splinter from the Mandalorian warrior culture: the True Mandalorians and the Death Watch. It should be noted that this was also the time that Mandalorian society began to distance itself from its warrior past, with the rise of a pacifist movement on their home world taking root. A civil war broke out between the True Mandalorians and the Death Watch, with a man by the name of Tor Vizsla being the leader of the opposition. The Death Watch would pursue Mereel and his True Mandalorians all the way back to Conquered Dawn, where the True Mandalorians would be sheltered by the new Journeyman Protector named Fett. A confrontation would occur at the homestead of the Fett family, seeing the journeyman protector, his wife and daughter killed, and his son, Jango, being adopted by Jaster mereel. In time, Mereel would be betrayed by one of his Mandalorian lieutenants and ambushed by Death Watch, seeing him killed in battle, and Jango Fett taking his place as the ruler of the true Mandalorians. With Jango Fett taking up the title of Mandalore, he and his fellow Mandalorians would be summoned to the planet of Galadran. They were to take a job fighting rebels that were putting the civilians and governors of the planet at risk. When the fighting had ended, Fett would order his men to return to camp and collect payment. He would do all of this with the hopes to gain the whereabouts of Vizsla, the man who had killed the previous Mandalore. He had later found out that Galadran was not only harboring the Death Watch leader, but funding his attempts to build up his splinter faction of super commandos. Vizsla would reveal himself in the governor's castle and attack Fett with his Death Watch soldiers, forcing Fett to flee. Unfortunately for the young Mandalore, the Jedi were called by Vizsla as a plot to eliminate the true Mandalorians. When the Jedi arrived, they would eliminate all of Jango's men and capture Fett, who would later be sold into slavery. This left Fett with a title that effectively meant nothing, with no true Mandalorians left to rule. After escaping slavery, Jango would face off again with Vizsla and eliminate him. After the confrontation, he would cast away the title and work exclusively as a bounty hunter. The human male Mandalorian warrior named Vizsla led the Death Watch during the final years of the Galactic Republic, briefly ruling as the Mandalore before his death at the hands of Darth Maul. Well, the recognized leader of all Mandalorians at the time was Duchess Satine Kryze. Vizsla would see this as a kind of heresy and a disgrace to the warrior traditions of the Mandalorians. He would take up the mantle of Mandalore, at the very least as an honorary title, and would lead the warrior clans of Mandalore with the influence of the Darksaber. This black lightsaber was a symbol of Clan Vizsla and was seen as an object that could unite all of the Mandalorian clans under whomever wielded it. Vizsla would work to dethrone the pacifist ruler Duchess Satine and her new Mandalorians with the help of Sith Lord Maul and his apprentice Savage Opress. Working as a liaison to the Death Watch for Maul's new Shadow Collective, Vizsla would secretly plot behind his back, planning to betray him. When this betrayal was revealed, Maul would be captured and imprisoned, but only for a short time before escaping. He would later challenge Vizsla to a duel, one warrior to another, and would end up defeating the Mandalorian. The Sith Lord known as Maul would lead the Mandalorians for just under a year at the tail end of the galaxy-wide war known as the Clone Wars. After defeating Vizsla in a duel which led to the beheading of the previous Death Watch leader, Maul would rule Mandalore from the shadows, while a figurehead would be the public leader for his organization. Since Maul held the Darksaber, he would be seen as the rightful rule of Mandalore, at least by most. Others believed no outsider could ever rule. The sister of the previous Duchess of Mandalore, bo-katan Kryze, would openly rebel against Maul and his super commandos. After the siege of Mandalore by the forces of the Republic's 332nd Company under the command of Captain Vaughn and Commander Rex, Maul would be taken into Republic custody. After Order 66 was enacted en route to Coruscant, the Venator he was being carried in would be sabotaged by Ahsoka Tano, Rex, and a small crew of droids in an attempt to escape. Maul was part of a diversion plan in this action and would find himself a shuttle to escape and return to Dathomir. In Star Wars Rebels, the crew of the Ghost, led by Ezra Bridger, would investigate Maul's presence on Dathomir, and upon investigating an old Night Sister tomb which Maul had seemingly made a home of sorts, the crew would fall upon the Darksaber. The resident Mandalorian of the crew, Sabine Wren, would take the Darksaber as she knew its power to unite all of Mandalore. Knowing she did not want to be the Mandalorian leader herself, she sought out the only other leader she figured would be the best candidate to lead her culture, bo-katan creeds. Bo-katan would hesitatingly take the power, and holding the darksaber high above her head, would look to unite all of Mandalore once again. Unfortunately, she would lose the darksaber to Moff Gideon, but with the help of Din Djarin, would later reclaim it. Harkening back to the old days of Mandalore, the Jango Fett clone named Spar or Alpha 02 would take up the rule of Mandalore, the Resurrector, a rogue Alpha-class ARC trooper who rebuilt the Mandalorian super commandos. Alpha 02 was cloned on the planet Kamino and was born with more independence and free thinking than his fellow soldiers. Interestingly, Spar also found that he inherited memories of his Gene father, Jango Fett. When the war broke out, Spar realized that he needed to reform the Mandalorian super commandos and traveled to the planet Mandalore. Alpha 02 takes over the Legends timeline of these events as he would overcome the pacifist movement of Duchess Satine Kryze and became the Mandalore, forming the Mandalorian Protectors, recruiting 200 police from Mandalore and a dozen former Death Watch members. He took the name of Mandalore the Resurrector as a sign that he would honor the old traditions of the Mandalorians, hating the Jedi for killing Jango's Mandalorians on Galadran. He and his Mandalorian protectors would fight in many battles together. However, the last ended in tragedy, as it was a Republic ambush set up by the ruling Chancellor Palpatine. A male human Mandalorian born on the planet Mandalore, Shisa would be one of 200 individuals who took up the title of Mandalorian Protector under Mandalore the Resurrector. During the Clone Wars, he would fight for the Confederacy of Independent Systems alongside the Mandalore, but would be one of only 3 protectors to survive a Republic ambush near the end of the war. Shisa, along with Spar and one other Mandalorian, would return to Mandalore, living to see the rise of the Galactic Empire. In the face of the Empire occupying his home world, Shisa would take up the title of Mandalore and forged a guerrilla resistance to drive them back. After fighting for years, the Mandalorians would win out against the Empire, with the unfortunate sacrifice of Shisa's close friend, Dala. Despite his work being free, Shisa would continue to fight the Empire and reformed the Mandalorian Protectors, playing a pivotal role in the Second Battle of Endor. Shisa would perish on the planet Shogun, saving the notorious bounty hunter Boba Fett from death. In his final moments, he would implore the son of Jango to become the new Mandalore, and so he did. Needless to say, Boba Fett needs no introduction. This infamous bounty hunter has captured audiences' attention ever since his introduction in The Empire Strikes Back. But outside of his role as a galaxy-renowned bounty hunter, he held the title of Mandalore. After his encounter with Fen Shisa, he would ascend to lead the Mandalorian Protectors, ending his 45-year bounty hunting career. While he took up the mantle of Mandalorian leadership, his daughter, named Aelin Vel, would pose as him for her own hunting career. She would use the armor of the previous Mandalore, Alpha 02. This would raise questions as to whether Fett was always himself when he appeared in the galaxy. The timeline when Boba was in the role of Mandalore also puts him as the sole ruler of the Mandalorians during the invasion of the Yuuzhan Vong into the galaxy. The Mandalorian Chernin Ordo would take up the role of Mandalore after the death of Boba Fett. For a time after the passing of the legendary bounty hunter, no Mandalorian took up the role of the sole leader until Ordo finally stepped up. In the year 127 ABY, Ordo would be hired by the Galactic Alliance to defend the planet of Bodajef against the forces of the Fel Empire until the Alliance could reinforce them. Unfortunately for Chernin and his Mandalorian forces, the Alliance fleet would never arrive. Overrun and facing impending doom, Ordo's forces would be defeated. A Mandalorian named Yaga Ox would further betray Ordo by sabotaging their communications, making it so the Mandalorians couldn't call for help. Ordo would be killed at the battle, with Ox usurping the title of Mandalore for himself. The human Mandalorian who would fight during the Sith Imperial War was a deviant individual who never swore loyalty to the rightful Mandalore, Churnin Ordo, but rather to a third party who sought to take the Mandalorians out of the war. Ox would betray Ordo at the Battle of Boba Jeff, taking command of the remaining Mandalorian forces after the death of the Mandalore. Because of this, he took the title for himself, keeping the Mandalorians out of the rest of the war. When the time of the Second Imperial Civil War would come around, Ox would still be in control of the Mandalorians. Unknown to him, another Mandalorian who served alongside Ordo, named Hondo Kar, would survive the betrayal at Boba Jeff and would return to the Mandalorians, intending to bring Ox to justice as well as exacting his revenge upon the treacherous Mandalore. As time in the Star Wars galaxy continues, more entries may be added to this list, but for now, that's every single Mandalore that we know of. Which was your favorite? Is there any you'd like to have served under? Let us know in the comments.